What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a P.O. Box, and Locals, Patreon. And all of these, all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to, provide great conversations. And thank you all for your continued support. Mike, good to see you. How are things?
Hey, yeah, thanks. Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me again. Things are great. I'm going busy, but beats the alternative. How about that?
Could be a lot worse, right?
It could be. Yeah.
So I was just sharing with you, and I wanted to start recording because I think it's interesting. People that know, I get a lot of slack for this because I've talked about when my lease is up next year that I'm going to leave Arizona, and I've said personally my family's on the East Coast, they're in Ohio, and it just makes sense. My mother's getting a little bit older, be a little bit closer, but. On the top level, like Arizona is not meant to have this many millions of people, right? And my friend Jim Kunstler, who I have on here all the time, he said in one of our conversations, he goes, it was never designed for this. He goes, it wasn't designed. It was a good idea at the time. Let's start with a street and another street and another street, so on, in a freeway, and let's build another freeway, and then we'll have a loop connecting the two freeways. And they just keep building. They don't stop. They're not stopping. And everybody I talk to, like I was talking to a couple of employees of the city of Scottsdale the other day, I was running, and they're opening up a new fire station. And I said, they keep building. At some point, we're going to run out of water. I mean, the Hoover Dam is going to hit the Deadpool status. I don't know when. It's not going to be today, tomorrow, next week, next year. But I feel like in my lifetime at 47, it's going to happen. And when that does, Arizona's done. And they keep saying, like everybody I talk to, they're like, oh, yeah, you're right. But yet, nobody leaves, and people still keep coming here. I don't get it. This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike.
Yeah, that's going to be a big deal. We've just doing some area studies, and then my Robert at Forward Observer, he's been tracking like the Ogallala Aquifer, and these things are going to be dry in like 20 or 30 years. At the current rate, you keep adding tens of thousands of people there, and they're going to go dry sooner, and they don't recharge fast enough to refill the aquifer. So, lots of people are going to be moving at some point within our lifetimes, seems to me.
Well, and so you say 20 or 30 years. Now, some of this stuff, and if you have knowledge of this, share it with me.
Well, that's sure.
No, I was going to say, if you have knowledge of it, share it with me because I don't understand. I mean, all thing I know is, and I looked this up the other day. My uncle lives in Las Vegas. He's been there since '78, and he's had boats his whole life. When I was a kid, I grew up in Ohio, but we would take family trips and we'd go on Lake Mead. And he was saying how he doesn't have boats anymore, and he goes, I get depressed driving by there because I see how low the levels keep falling and falling and falling. So I just did a quick Google search, and it said to reach Deadpool status, it was 100 feet. I think it was 100 feet away from hitting it, which when that happens, all the power, so that would impact Nevada, Arizona, California, and Mexico. Not New Mexico, Mexico. And it didn't sound like it sounded like that was not that far off.
This is definitely Robert's domain of expertise. He talks about it, but I've done area studies for clients, and that's one of the first things I do when I get to physical terrain. I start looking at the water situation. It doesn't matter what your scenario is, you got to have water. You got to have clean water. And so, I was looking at one in Arkansas and Missouri, and they were saying that aquifer there had maybe 20 years at best before it's depleted to the level where they can't sustain the people there. And that's due to irrigation, due to a bunch of stuff, but mainly it's due to overpumping for all reasons, irrigation, drinking water, et cetera. And this is a problem in many places. Again, this is not my area of expertise, but I'm familiar with the topic.
Yeah, and people that I speak with, they're like, "You're crazy for leaving. You're crazy for leaving." They have enough systems in place here, the government, that that they have a solution. I go, "Okay, what is it?" They're like, "Well, I don't know," but they say that they have a solution. I'm like, "Okay, I know what my solution is going to be is to leave." And if you're comfortable with that, whatever the government's proposing, then great. But I think history has shown us, especially over the last 5 years, and really, and you can go back to COVID, but you can also look at just as what's happened in North Carolina, in California, in Ohio, East Palestine, Ohio, in Lahaina, in Texas. Government's responses haven't been too quick.
Mm-hmm. I one of the things that we dealt with here, I live in Central Texas here in July. We had like 300% of the monthly precipitation that we do for an average July. And I literally rained for 2 weeks, part of every day for 2 weeks here in the driest month of the entire year. And my first thought was they have to be like cloud seeding or doing the rain, whatever that geoengineering stuff is. So maybe there will be some technology, and we'll keep our fingers crossed that there are no unintended consequences. But maybe technological advancement will end up saving the desert, and we'll see.
Well, and even from a standpoint of you can't build a pipeline. I had Craig Fuller of Freight Waves. We were talking about, he lives in Tennessee, and he goes, "I got plenty of water where I live, but how am I going to get it to you? You can't. It's not like you can build a pipeline. I mean, maybe, I don't know. And just have it route all the way to Arizona, Colorado, New Mexico, California, Nevada."
Yeah, be pretty tough going uphill from east to west.
And then I got to share this last story with you, Mike, because I find it funny. This is where people's heads are at. So I was talking to another person, and this woman was saying how, she's got some family land on the East Coast, and I'm going to be assumptive here, a liberal person, and said, if things really get bad, I know I have a place on the East Coast that I can just go to. And I'm like, okay, this is the problem here. You think you're just going to be able to go to Sky Harbor and get on an airplane and just fly out if things were to really, really go that sideways?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not. Okay, so let's say car. You're going to there's one interstate. You've been here. You've been to Flagstaff. The I-17 to get from Phoenix to Flag. Mm-hmm. There's 6 million people that live here. You think you're going to be able to get on that highway and just get out of here?
Yeah, I was in Phoenix for a short while for a military exercise, and is it Camelback Mountain that's in is it Tempe or wherever it is?
Arcadia, Phoenix, right there.
Phoenix, Phoenix area, yeah. Well, and we rucked to the top of that thing, and I remember looking down and just like houses for as far as the eye can see, houses, pretty like urban dense area of resident houses. And I just remember thinking yeah, this would be awful if there was a disaster here.
How long ago was that?
Oh, that was back in 2008-ish.
So you're almost 20 years. And you haven't been here since?
I'm passing through, yeah, but I haven't spent any time there since.
Yeah, you wouldn't believe how much more building they're doing now. They're not stopping. I almost feel like every piece of land right now is being designated for something, whether it be apartments or more houses. Mm-hmm. I would make the argument, and you would know this better than me, this might be the worst place in the country, one of the worst places in the country to be right now because of no water.
Yeah, I would say Phoenix all the way to LA. Pretty tough spot.
Would you put Vegas in that category then too?
Oh yeah, the whole Southwest area. Because when you're looking at the drought map, the Southwest has the absolute worst drought problems, obviously, of the entire country. And you remember 2 or 3 years ago, we had this really bad drought in Texas, and it was so bad. A lot of the ranches or farms that grow hay grass for cattle, they don't have irrigation because where I live, we normally get decent amounts of rain, and we didn't get any rain. And we had like one partial cut. We in a really good year we'll get like 3 cuttings of hay at our place, and we got basically a half cutting due to the drought. And that's one of the things that sent beef prices way higher because they had to cull so many cows, so many beef cattle. And so at any rate, that got me thinking. I was like, I do I want to stay here for the next 20, 40 years? Just because of the drought conditions. And there's really nothing, there's absolutely nothing you could do about it. Because like we're not set up to pump water out of the aquifer or out of the rivers, or which were low as well, or out of the lakes. The ponds were dry, and it was hot in the summer. I don't mean to digress, but point being, it was rough in Central Texas and it was for like 2 or 3 years we had that drought.
Well, and I think we've shown too, and I would not have been aware of this. I mean, I had a friend that was it's in Western North Carolina that with Helene, and he was without power for 10 days. And I've talked to other people that are also in Western North Carolina, and the single most important thing, you think you're a prepper and you think you're prepared until you actually go through it, and then there's you look back on it and all right, what would I do differently, the do's and don'ts. But the number one thing, and I know you know this, but for people, when I hear the generators, and I wouldn't have questioned this prior to my friend experiencing things, you hear the generators and all these other things. No, none of that matters. Water. If you don't have water, you're dead.
I always start with water.
But masses, I think they're preppers. They don't realize that.
Yeah, well, you've got food and you've got your AR-15s and you've got your ammunition, and by God, you can take on the world.
I mean, and especially here, not to spend the whole hour talking about Phoenix, but what is it, 3 days without water and you'd be dead? That would be maybe a day here, a day and a half with the heat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hot and dry, tough environment to be in for sure.
But it's you've been talking about this a lot in terms of organizing, counter-organizing. I think people get mad because they feel like I don't provide solutions or my guests don't provide solutions on where we are. You're doing that right now, and you're providing solutions for what people can do as individuals. And that's why I thought it was really important for you to come back on here and talk about that. And I wonder if you wouldn't mind kind of delving into what that is, counter-organizing, and what people should be doing on the individual level.
Sure. Well, this started, when I founded Ford Observer back in 2016, I started tracking these left-wing groups, and that snowballed into 2017 when Trump took office, and then 2020, and it's been kind of a little bit of a lull for the past few years. But one of the things that I've done over the past few months is read a bunch of books on left-wing organizing and really understanding their sources of power, because this organization is one of the 3 sources of power. And there is a phenomenal amount of untapped power, latent power that I see on the right that we are not making use of, but that the left uses very well. And so I'm an intel guy by trade. And as someone said, I'm kind of moving from the S2 shop to the S3 shop, from intelligence to operations, really because I see the need in organizing, or in many cases, counter-organizing. And one reason why I feel a strong sense of urgency is because I actually am very concerned about the 2028 election. I'm sure it's far enough away that it's not urgent for a lot of people. But when I'm looking at these, and I'm primarily talking about establishment left groups, near as I can tell, we are looking at basically a 3-phase campaign that they're organizing. And a lot of people talk about color revolution, and in many cases, they don't really understand what color revolution is. In this case, they're 100% right. Because when I sit through these strategy calls for the country's largest protest organizing group, and they talk about what their strategy is to organize against the Trump administration, it's the same exact strategy that we see in a handful of actual color revolutions. like what happened in Serbia from the late 90s to 2000, what happened in Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, a handful of other countries. And so it is the same exact source materials. It's the same exact doctrine. It's the same exact strategy and tactics of historic color revolutions. I have no doubt that's what they're planning here. And it has been popular to say that that's what they've been building as a color revolution. I agree. All I'm doing is bringing a doctrinal understanding of what that looks like. And once we have that framework and once you understand it, we can then start anticipating things that are going to happen in the future. So what I think we're probably looking at here, the reason why I feel such a strong sense of urgency is because phase one is protest. That's the phase we're in now. You are here. And they're building this protest movement probably after the midterms. It may be next year, but probably after the midterms, we're probably looking at that protest movement evolving into a resistance movement. So we're talking about a lot more direct action demonstrations, civil disobedience, occupations, sit-ins, a lot of disruptive forms of protest, trying to grind the gears down of the Trump administration, or not just of the administration, but ICE, federal law enforcement, whatever their conservative groups, whatever their targets are. And then potentially, I don't think it's a 100% thing, obviously, but potentially that resistance movement evolves into a revolutionary movement to coincide with the 2028 election if it doesn't go their way. I know Trump jokes about staying in office after 2028, the Trump 2028 campaign. I think he's joking, but let's just say for the sake of argument that he's not. If that election were to be contested or failed or illegitimate, we will probably see let me say this, illegitimate in the eyes of left-wing groups. We will probably see that continuation of protest to resistance to revolution coincide with the 2028 election. So I look at this and say, Mike, you've got 3 years at max. You've got 3 years to organize your community, to build as much political, social, and economic power as you can, because there's no turning back. It's not like we have this color revolution and then things magically get better. Everything goes downhill from there. And so I'm concerned, obviously, not just about the national level, but the state and my county level as well. In a long-winded explanation.
Are you surprised? So, in your eyes, like the No Kings protest, was that a test to expand it, make it bigger? Because I'll tell you, it was the organization on a nationwide basis that day. Never saw anything like that before.
Pretty phenomenal. Yeah. So Indivisible is the group that's responsible for No Kings, and not just No Kings, but a handful of the other, like the Tesla takedown and the Hands Off March that I think was back in April. So yes, they started back in 2016, and they started that in direct response to Trump. So this is something, they've been building the groundwork now for nearly 10 years. They took a little bit of a break during Biden. Now they're back. On that No Kings Day, I think that was June 14th, they probably mobilized about 3 million protesters. It was one of the largest single-day protests in U.S. history. So I think that's very significant. Just being able to turn out 3 million people. I think there's a lot of protest fatigue. We just got done with this Labor Day, National Day of Action. It was a snooze fest. I didn't see a lot of it in news coverage. They also didn't say how many people turned out for that, so I'm guessing it's way less than 1 million, probably in the hundreds of thousands. A non-event, basically. But what people have to keep in mind is even though mass mobilization has plateaued, there's 2 things to keep in mind. They just announced earlier this week, No Kings Day 2.0. They want this national mass mobilization protest to be larger than the first. So 3+ million. I'm pretty doubtful they'll be able to get there. But I don't look at turnout as the best measure of their power or of their effectiveness. What I look at is they have effectively built a multi-million person get out the vote army. Because if you show up to a protest, you're willing to grab a friend and get them registered to vote and bring them to the polls on election day. And this is their interim goal, is not protests not to affect political or social change through protest. It is to take the House from Republicans and give it to Democrats, which would neuter the Trump agenda, and we go right back in to the problems that we had during the first go round. So it's a little more complex than that, but that is kind of the overview of at least what I'm seeing. So again, this protest thing is significant because they do have massive levels of ground level organization, but their eyes are on the midterms. After the midterms, there's only two outcomes: Democrat majority or Republican majority. If the Democrats take the House majority, then I think we see escalation from protest to resistance, because now they're doing it in conjunction with a legitimate body, which is a Democrat-controlled Congress. And they call this the inside-outside strategy. So you have Congress, you have federal employees, the workforce, the civil service push back against the Trump administration from the inside. And then you have political pressure campaigns, you have social power exerted from the outside, like protests and stuff. They call it the inside-outside strategy. So we're going to see escalation either way. That's the first scenario. The second scenario is Republicans keep the House majority due to this redistricting thing. I think by Robert's last count, if California does not successfully redistrict prior to the midterms, Republicans are up by 13 seats, assuming they win all of them. And remember, they're creating additional Republican seats by basically deleting currently held Democrat seats. If that happens, then that Congress, I think a third of the country easily will say that's an illegitimate Congress, and whatever laws they pass that they don't like are illegitimate. And then they escalate against that because it's our dying democracy, and the legislature was stolen, and et cetera, et cetera. At any rate, point is, I think it's probably unavoidable that we escalate going into late 2026 into 2027.
When is this next No Kings 2.0?
Oh yeah, sorry. The next No Kings is coming up on the 18th of October. So they just announced that earlier, like maybe Tuesday or Wednesday. And again, I doubt that it's bigger than the first one. I could be wrong. I think there's protest fatigue. I think they're tired of turning out to protest. It doesn't accomplish anything.
That's the one thing I don't have to, come back to Phoenix for a second. One thing I don't worry about when it happens in the summer here. You want to go stand out there when it's 110 or 115, God bless you. But you're not getting, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but you're not getting thousands of people that are going to stand out there. It's too hot.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of these protests have been pretty short duration. And if you do it on a Saturday, you can have it in the morning, you can have it later in the afternoon. So, but yeah, otherwise I agree with you. Typically though, you look at protests, there was this kind of, a lot of people thought this was a foregone conclusion. There are a lot of predictions. The summer of 2025 is going to be the 2020 Summer of Love 2.0. It was going to kick off. We're in riot season. And last year, I told people, I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing Summer of Love 2.0 this summer. It's coming though. It is coming. It just has not been this summer. Probably won't be next summer. But on the other side of the midterms, this is why I feel such a strong sense of urgency. The people, you need people. Your power, your legitimacy comes from people. As an intel guy, your intelligence comes from people, your human sources. And so there are a lot of good reasons why everyone should be focused on organizing their friends and family and meeting new people and expanding their local tribe. And keep it sane, keep it local, keep it on the local level. And that should be a primary focus, I think, for us for the next at least 3 years.
Do you think one of the driving factors? Well, two questions. One, after the election, you didn't anticipate any type of unrest after Trump got reelected, and in this past summer, you didn't see a Summer of Love 2.0. Do you think part of that is attributed that people still have food in their refrigerator, credit cards still work, and so the motivation's not there? They're not in a state of desperation.
Well, I think a lot of things are true. you look back at 2020, and there were the pandemic lockdowns, and there was the lockdown induced recession that kept people out of work and kept people because they lost their jobs or they're working from home, kept kids out of school, et cetera. So yeah, you just have millions of additional Americans as kind of a protest pool to start with. You also had the recession stimulus. So some people had some walking around money. And then you also had from 2016 to all the way to 2020, so 4 to 5 years, you have relentless agitation. That's what was going on into the summer of 2020 that was not happening in the summer of 2024 or in the lead up to the election in November 24 or the inauguration in 25. There are a lot of other indicators that I'm an Intel guy, I track indicators. There are a lot of things that I saw in 2016 and 2020 that I just was not seeing in 2024. And so there are a lot of reasons why a Summer of Love 2.0 was never going to happen this year.
Yeah, I mean, you look at 2020. I mean, the anger, people being told that they couldn't leave their house, couldn't leave their apartment. They had to cover up when they were in a store. Kids being, ripped apart from their childhood of school and prom and on and on and on. And then you had George Floyd and all that, and the public shaming and the level of anger. I mean, I know I felt it, and millions of others. So I could see, and you're doing a good job of explaining it to me, like how I could see how the anger was so high, and it would cause people to just erupt.
Yeah, when you look at low intensity conflict, so that's everything from on the low end, like violent social movements. It's an umbrella term. Violent social movements, terrorism, guerrilla movements, all the way up to and including insurgency. And then throw in popular revolutions or color revolutions. Low intensity conflict is war beneath the threshold, or I would say it's conflict, beneath the threshold of conventional war. So it's not tanks and bombers, but it is above routine peaceful competition. And that has been ongoing since at least I would say even go back to 2015 to the white nationalist movement kind of had this resurgence. And I think that was probably the beginning. Maybe you go back to 2008 to the great financial recession or crisis. So it's ongoing, and it's not going to end anytime soon. But I think the left is far weaker today than they were in 2017, which is maybe a cause for optimism, maybe also a cause for concern.
What would cause for concern? How?
Because being smaller, but so they're in this rebuilding period. They have to go out and rebuild, and there's not a sense of urgency. And also, I think a lot of people are just maybe still not necessarily burned out from 2020, but they're burned out from just this relentless media and narrative onslaught. I mean, even, you had AOC come out or maybe earlier this year, and she says, are we really going to do 4 more years of this? And you could just see it on her face and hear it in her voice. She's tired of all the well, I should be a little more careful here. She's obviously a religious zealot when it comes to her ideology, but you could tell she was burned out and she just was tired of this stuff. And I think that is the national mood. I think Americans are tired of the 2020 stuff. And I think that's another reason why the left has not gained more traction so far this year. They do have this pretty dedicated pool of activists and supporters, but I don't think their movement is expanding yet like they had hoped. At any rate, so when you look at conflict, you're looking at kind of 3 different things. Fault lines, so that could be racial, like in 2020, it could be class, like in 28 and also 2020, political, ideological, etc. And then you have accelerators of conflict. So if you got a pot of water and you put it on the stove, accelerators turn the heat up, and then you get this low boil, which is where we were from 2017 to 2020. And then finally, the third thing you're looking for is a trigger, and that's the late May 2020 George Floyd was the trigger. And you got this revolutionary rupture. because there was so much pressure that was built into the system, and that the powder was dry. We didn't have that in 2024. We don't have that in 2025. You're not going to get some massive explosion when you don't have enough pressure built into the system. So it's another reason why I think it's probably not going to be anytime soon, maybe in 2028.
Don't you find it though how you'll see people that are like almost like they want it to happen, like they want a civil war to occur, like they last year, and I fell for it in 2020. I thought, I was one of the, and I didn't re-Q, but I wasn't, but I thought I thought that Trump would declare martial law, the military would come in. I fell for it. What am I going to do? You learn,
Mm-hmm.
but last year I was listening to people and talking about civil war. I'm like, yeah, I don't see it. I just don't see it. I'm not an expert, but in my little sphere driving around in Phoenix and Scottsdale, I don't see people arming up and hitting the streets.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I don't see it either. Not in that way. When you're looking at any type of armed conflict, specifically low intensity conflict. So again, we're not talking about Russia, Ukraine. We're not talking about 1861 or World War II. Violent social movements, terrorist campaigns, insurgencies, revolution, proto-revolution, or popular revolutions. Yeah, what you're looking for is you start with a social base. And is that social base being politicized or radicalized? That's the next thing you're looking for. And then do you have a radicalized or politicized social base that as a base is arming up? And when you get to that stage, then yes, you're basically on insurgency watch or like domestic conflict watch. And I think we're there on the right at a very low level. And it's probably a big reason why there's so many of these domestic violent extremist researchers, and they do a terrible job of covering the right, by the way. Mainly because it's propaganda. They have to, they've got to get paid. They're not going to get paid if their contracts and their grants are going to get canceled if they say, "Hey, actually, not much going on here, Bob." So at any rate, when you get to that point, when you have a politicized or radicalized social base that is also arming up in anticipation of the conflict, that's when the big giant red flags go up. We just haven't been there, in my opinion.
Well, what about all these big cities, these urban areas, and in particular to Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, Los Angeles, go on and on, Minneapolis, Chicago. The talk of the National Guard, although it seems to be quieting down over the last 2 days or so, the idea of National Guard being deployed to Chicago. Where do you see these cities going?
Yeah, I think Chicago right now we're just looking at a federal law enforcement surge. There's a court case that actually, I think, as of right now, would preclude the Trump administration from deploying the National Guard in areas where, I don't recall the specifics of the court case. It's something that Robert, the benefit of being at Fort Observer is employing additional intelligence analysts who can keep track of things that I can't, because there's a lot going on.
I gotta get Robert on here.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll link you two guys up. So at any rate, there's a court case right now, and the judge ruled against the Trump administration. I think the Trump administration has or is planning to appeal it to the Supreme Court. That ruling probably won't happen until the fall. So we're probably looking at a lull in National Guard deployments at least to the fall. In the meantime, we are looking at federal law enforcement surge. So that happened in LA, and then it happened in DC. Chicago, they've already started deploying additional federal law enforcement to Chicago. The Trump administration just floated New Orleans. He's previously floated New York City. I've seen Seattle and Portland on that list as well. So this looks like a long-term campaign that is going to last for years. And it seems like they're probably just going to leapfrog city to city, arresting. I saw this interesting statistic the other day. I think it's true, but I saw it on the internet, so it has to be true.
Internet's undefeated, isn't it? The internet's undefeated, Mike.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Something like 80% of violent crime is committed by people who have been arrested 3 or more times. And so if you just have federal law enforcement go through and really try to hammer those people, you will have, as long as they stay in prison, you will probably have a lasting impact on violent crime. And even CBS was forced to admit, I'm sure everyone's seen this, CBS was forced to admit, say, yep, murder's down, carjacking's down, robbery, theft, everything's down in D.C. as a result of the surge. And so I think this probably is the Trump administration's campaign to go into these cities, even where they're not welcome, and then leave and say, we cut murders by 50%. If you want murders to go back up to 100%, vote for Democrats. If you're tired of being scared of your children waiting on the bus stop, or if they're going to be robbed or beaten by a homeless man or a drug addict, or killed in a car crash driven by an illegal, if you don't want that to happen, then vote for Republicans. I mean, it seems to me like that's probably a winning message.
Yeah, I just wonder with that is, if it moves into some of these cities, what is the end game? And then what if things do escalate between, because if you start interrupting drug flow, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but, they're not going to just take that quietly.
Yeah. One of the things that we saw all the time in Iraq and Afghanistan, they were dealing with insurgents and some criminal groups. But even the criminal groups and cartels operate the same way here. They leave. They'll leave an area where they'll lay low and they'll stop doing whatever it is they're doing. We would go into a village or have some major operation in a district, and if the Taliban didn't want to stay there and fight, they would just leave. And then we would eventually leave that district, and the Taliban will come back in. It's happened in Vietnam. It's happened to the French and Algeria and Indochina. It happens in all these types of conflicts. It's going to happen here. You're going to have these organized crime rings stop carjacking people and wait for federal law enforcement for the surge to leave, and then they're going to go right back to the same thing if they're not caught. So I think, maybe this is a temporary thing, but hopefully, I think the end game is hopefully you go into some of these cities and you show City Hall and you show these police chiefs and you show law enforcement that living with all this crime is a choice. That's the popular saying on social media. I also think it's true. It is just a choice. You simply have to arrest people and arrest the violent criminals and throw them in prison, and your crime problem is largely solved.
Basically, it's just one big cat and mouse game. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, I think there will be an element of these violent criminals not committing violent crime for a while until their risk returns to normal, and then they'll probably go right back to it. But again, the challenge for federal law enforcement is going into these areas and arresting the right people, arresting the repeat offenders, getting them through the justice system, making sure that the DA does not drop charges or doesn't allow them to plead down. Just throw these people in prison, and you will solve the crime problem.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like rocket science here to fix these things.
No, it's not. Robert and I were actually just talking about this morning. It's inconceivable to me how you would have, if you're a mayor or if you're a police chief, how you would not want to lock up criminals. And maybe because they don't want to go after their constituents. Maybe, I'm sure at some level they're on the take, they're being cut in, they're getting campaign money, they're getting whatever, making money from organized crime, maybe, or just going to their aunt or their cousin or whatever for safekeeping until they get out of office, whatever was happening. They're putting in their mom's name. But I just don't understand this reluctant. It's not even a reluctance. It's a complete rejection of actually enforcing the law against violent criminals. I don't understand it, but do you?
Well, what is it an ideology where they feel like these people they can reform, they can, we need to be sensitive to these people. They've had a tough upbringing. I don't know. I don't get it either.
Well, so actually, I think you hit on a good point, because we actually have seen from some of these city mayors, whoever the mayor is in Baltimore came out and basically said that. He said, policing is not the only way to cut down on crime. You actually got to go down in, you got to get in the communities, and you got to reach these kids on an interpersonal level, and you got to teach them that, crime doesn't pay and that they should not be little hellions all across running across the city. And so, yeah, the alternatives to policing movement, that kind of thing. Yeah, maybe that's why.
But then you hear some of these cities, they talk, what do they talk about, taking a mental health advocate out with police?
Yeah, the social worker. Yeah,
How's that going to work? I mean, how?
yeah, we're going to social work drug dealers into being good citizens again.
Just like when you see a chief of police. I mean, Cleveland, where I'm from, I grew up in a suburb outside of it, but chief of police is a woman. How does that work? I mean, how can you be a woman and chief of police?
Well, societies that tend to not respect women, it does not work out very well. Not respect women in positions of authority tends to not work well.
Right. Right. I mean, it's, I don't know, top 40, 50 cities maybe in the country. And I don't know. These things, that's where I see. I was talking to somebody else about this the other day. Like you people, like these cities, these local officials, I don't know if they just don't get it or they're just going against the Trump, everything they do to just stop it or just put, sand in the gears, but they just don't get it. Like New York City. I mean, they're on the brink of electing a Momdani as the mayor. And it sounds like it's inevitable.
Maybe. I know there are a lot of wealthy New York residents that I think have probably been quietly donating money and funding maybe some of these get out the vote campaigns. I don't know. I think New York City probably deserves whatever they're about to get, though.
So that's where with these cities and these urban areas, I mean, would you move to one right now?
No. No, no, not under these conditions.
Because I can only see it. It's just going to continue to deteriorate. I don't know how you get them back on track. I don't know how you get a city like L.A. I mean, Portland. I'm watching this journalist. I was talking about her yesterday too. Katie Daviscourt. She must live somewhere around the Seattle area, but she's been in Portland. My God, man, that city is just a disaster.
It's a choice. That encampment, the encampment in Portland, but Portland and Seattle, both tier 1 cities, or like far left criminality, militancy. And there's that ICE facility in Portland, and you had the Rose City Antifa and whoever other groups go out there and build this encampment. And I think for a period of days, they basically shut the entrance to that facility down. You couldn't go in or out of the main entrance to that ICE at a federal facility. At any rate, law enforcement comes through and they clear it. They've cleared that encampment 5 times because every time they clear it, these little cockroaches just come back and set up new tents and set up this new encampment there. And that is a failure to enforce laws. It's a failure to arrest people, failure to charge and indict and throw. So how you change it's due to political policies. It's not due to endemic crime that cannot be solved. There is just no political will among the leaders to solve that problem. So I think ultimately it probably comes down to voters, unfortunately.
And then the question you ask is, a state like Washington, Oregon. I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time up there. I've actually never been to Oregon, but Washington, I've spent a little bit of time. And, people say, well, like California, well, there's a lot of red area. And it's like, okay, yeah, but what is the safe distance you'd want to be away from these cities like Portland and Seattle? Is it 100 miles or is it an hour or is it 3 hours?
I'm aware of a handful of communities. There's at least one outside of Austin, and I imagine other cities as well. They're building a private community out there, like a private gated community, and you're 30 to 45 minutes from downtown. So if you have meetings, there's stuff you need to go do downtown, you're 30 to 45 minutes away. Otherwise, you're pretty safely removed from the day-to-day bad things happening in those cities. And that to me is a very attractive situation. One thing that I would caution, though, is the more conservatives move out of cities, you're just ceding greater amounts of power to the left. And in any case where, I look at elections in Iraq, in Baghdad, there's a huge effort to secure the major population centers and count the votes in the major population centers because that's where a majority of the population lives. And I'm not saying we'll ever get there, but potentially. I think the United States is headed towards authoritarianism. I'm not sure if it's going to be left wing or right wing, but it is going to be some wing.
I agree with you, Mike, on that. Sorry, not to interrupt you, but I agree with you on that.
Yeah, so even in these dictatorships and these authoritarian countries, there's still elections. And who was it, Stalin or whoever said, I don't care who votes, I care who counts the votes or something like that. So, at any rate, I would obviously not want to be in a city then. At any rate, the point is, if you're trying to control a country, you don't need to control every square inch. You control the population centers, and if you can do that, you control a majority of the ballots, and then you can get whoever you want elected, quote unquote, legitimately.
Didn't you live in Austin for a while?
I did. Yeah, for several years, and we moved a few years ago because I was tired of the insanity. We moved outside of the city limits of Austin.
What's it like there now? When's the last time you were there?
Oh, I don't go back. I'm there occasionally. There was a really bad homeless problem. I worked downtown on 7th and Brazos, where my office was, and 200 meters away, there was basically a homeless encampment. And there were like 200 or 300 homeless people out there, all times, day and night. And there's just a massive problem with drugs and druggies and obviously prostitution and robberies. And it got to the point where I just said, if the city is not going to go in and clean this place up and make it safe for the people who work in these city blocks, why am I here paying taxes to these people? Like, why am I here contributing? We're just going to leave. And so we moved outside of the city a ways, but I don't know. I hope that answers your question.
Has it gotten cleaned up at all, or has it gotten worse?
Oh yeah, sorry. I think that problem probably has been cleaned up. Last time I was there, I still saw homeless under the overpasses, and you see the shopping carts and the tents and the blankets and all that stuff. I don't know if it's been cleaned up recently. I haven't been there in a while.
Yeah, it's the same thing we're experiencing here, and I tell people, where I'm from in Ohio, because they're just so blissfully unaware. It's amazing how many people still over the last 5 years they're so clueless and blissfully unaware of what's going on. But I can't say that I blame them either, because they don't see that in the nice suburbs like outside of Cleveland. And I think just because of the winter, they can't survive. Homeless can't survive when it's 20 degrees out. But here, there's a bridge not far from where I live. They live right underneath that thing. And the city will eventually come in and they give them, some cities give them notice. They got like 24 hours or 48 hours to leave. And then they'll go in, clean up, throw all the junk out, but then they just come back a week later, 2 weeks, whatever. Because what are you going to do? You're going to write these people a ticket?
Mm-hmm.
They're under the freeways. You see the shopping carts. We have canals here. You see shopping carts in the canals.
Mm-hmm. The panhandlers were really bad as well. And I think a lot of the homeless, quote unquote, problem, yes, there are some people they will never be able to pay rent because they can't hold a job, and they need to not be on the street. They need to be in a facility somewhere probably. But a lot of it's cultural. I saw a lot of young people who were capable of working, but they wouldn't, because they would just sit out there for a few hours and they'd make 50, 75, $100, enough to eat and go buy some drugs and some food. And that was their day-to-day thing. They did this 7 days a week, and they wouldn't even they worked fewer hours than I did, and they just, got their however much money they needed for the rest of the day. Then they just cut out. And not a bad lifestyle if that's kind of life you want to live, but it's a lifestyle choice. And so it just seems to me like, I don't know how you combat that other than ordinances that say no panhandling, and there's 30 days in jail for your second offense. And then I don't know. And apparently Dallas and Fort Worth and San Antonio were sending their homeless to Austin, like just putting them on buses and shipping up there. And it wasn't those cities' problems anymore. And it didn't seem to me like Austin really wanted to do anything about that.
But from what you gather, I know you haven't been there in a while. You feel like it's gotten a little bit better then.
I would imagine it probably has, because so many people have been moving out of Austin for many reasons. And one of those reasons is because just of the policies. So I think, they're probably, I don't want to speculate too much, but I would imagine the problem has gotten a little bit better, but I don't know that for a fact.
Do you do any analysis or keep an eye on what's occurring in Europe right now in regards to fault lines and
I keep up with it about as much as any terminally online right winger does. So I'm familiar. I've seen this stuff that's going on in the UK and in France and Germany and other places, Sweden.
do you think that's closer to some type of kinetic conflict than say, I mean, well, before you answer that, as we sit here, today's the 4th, the United States is not near any type of kinetic conflict internally. Is that a fair statement that I just made?
Well, the United States, I think we are in a period of low intensity conflict. I mean, there's obviously some conflict going on. There are politically motivated shootings, for instance, like that ambush at the ICE facility outside Fort Worth, Texas, back in, was that June? Or no, sorry, it was over the July 4th weekend. So, I look at that, that's very clearly low intensity conflict. I think the UK is in a far worse position than we are.
Would you put the Mangione assassination at United Health? Is that part of that?
I would put that in the same category as yes, politically or socially motivated armed violence, which is low intensity. Violent social movements is low intensity conflict.
And then same with the school shootings in Minneapolis?
Yeah, the trans shootings, yeah, I would probably say that is at some level low intensity conflict as well. Well, I don't know. I can only go off of what I was told, and you see the little scribblings that this trans shooter in Minneapolis did, and then he said, "Oh, I don't have any reason for doing this specifically other than just to," he said he was like taken over by evil or something like that. But yeah, I mean, I think it seemed religiously motivated, which again I think would be low intensity conflict, any form of tribal conflict.
And it's fair to say we're going to see more of these.
Yeah, I don't think it'll stop.
But Europe, based upon what you're reading and what you're following, they're farther down the line. They're above the low intensity conflict.
I think Europe is maybe at the point where the United States would have been if Kamala Harris had won. Actually, Europe's probably in a worse condition. But you have these elites that are just completely disconnected from society. For all his faults, Jared Diamond has this really banger quote in, I think it was in Collapse, a book that he wrote called Collapse. And he said, when a society's elites, but when decision makers are insulated from the negative consequences of their choices, the end is near. That is a society that's headed for collapse, because there is no feedback mechanism to get these elites to pursue better policies, but they're insulated from the effects of their choices. So they don't feel directly, maybe in some cases, not even indirectly, they don't feel how bad their choices are. And then at some point you just get in a doom loop where you have these societal elites or this country's leaders making these such egregiously bad choices. It's got to end somewhere. It cannot go on indefinitely. And I think that's probably where the UK is. So I think they're obviously already in this doom loop. I mean, when you have the UK government, or was it a judge or magistrate or whoever came out and said, the rights of migrants supersede the rights of the native British, that is an illegitimate government. And that is a government that needs to be toppled. And I think the UK is probably getting much closer to that. I don't track this every day. Maybe I should be, because it does seem to be like the next place that's going to pop off. But I look here in this country, and if Harris had won and continued the mass immigration, open border policies, with the showdown with the state of Texas over, who, if the state of Texas can't even shut down its part of the border and patrol its own border, I think we probably would. It would not have been as bad as the UK, but we were probably heading towards some sort of flashpoint in the United States in that other scenario.
Yeah, did you see the video going around with the Scottish girl with the axe?
I did, yes.
That was unbelievable. She pulled that axe out.
Yeah. Yeah, even there, I saw some competing narratives because on the one hand, it seemed to be the winning narrative, at least the initial narrative was, you have this, 12 or 14, whatever, year old girl defending her sister against one of these quote unquote the South Asian migrants, whatever he was. I think that guy was actually Bulgarian, not South Asian, but typically it's South Asian, Middle Eastern, North African, or Indian. And he said, oh yeah. So the narrative was that, she was protecting her sister against this, migrant violence or whatever. And then you had some other people that say, no, actually it's pretty common for young girls to carry those kinds of weapons because they're very poor and they get hung up in these basically criminal gangs. And, typically they age out of it. I don't know which is the truth. And maybe they could both be true. Both things could be true. But even then, yeah, and I look at that and sometimes it's difficult for people to separate what's online from what's reality. And what I saw is that video did seem to inflame tensions with the online right. And maybe at a certain point, it is also an accelerator of conflict. Go ahead.
Meaning that they want that. So explain accelerator of conflict.
Yeah, so accelerators are things that turn the social temperature up. They're turning the temperature up on the stove, and we've got this pot of water that is heating up, and it can't explode and boil over the top until it's reached a certain temperature. And so I look at that, and it's not the straw that broke the camel's back, but it is another straw, and that camel is already carrying a pretty heavy load. But it's been a long string of these accelerators, and I don't know when a trigger will be. They're basically impossible to predict. But we can look at accelerators and say, well, is this inflaming tensions or is this decreasing tensions? And everything I'm seeing online is just inflaming tensions. Like every week there's something else.
Almost like these governments across the world, especially in the Western civilization, like they want this, so they give another reason to lock things down. Do you feel that way at all?
Yeah, I don't know if, people talk about the Hegelian dialectic, the problem reaction solution, right? You create the problem because you want you have a reaction that is desired. You have an intended reaction, rather, so problem, and then you generate the reaction. And then the reaction demands a solution that you wanted all along that you could not have done on your own unless you had created the problem, which led to the reaction, which led to the demand of the solution. I don't know if that's what's going on in the UK or not, but certainly does happen in the United States here from time to time, I think.
Do you see, in relation to the UK and Europe, something once that threshold or that boundary is crossed, there'll be no turning back type of thing with a flashpoint?
Is there a point of no return? I imagine there will be a point of no return because effectively you have a native population. Okay, let's go back just real quick. This lady named Barbara Walter, she has a book called How Civil Wars Start. Half of it was a great book. The other half was just complete and utter crap. She was a former CIA analyst. She was on the Political Instability Task Force. And one of her key findings is when you have a politically or socially, culturally, religiously dominant section of society that loses that dominance, so that cultural dominance is replaced by a new segment of society, when those people's power and influence are taken away from them, or when it's replaced by power from someone else, the people who lose that power don't just throw up their hands and say, well, guys, we lost our power. That's it. Her findings is that they typically will resort to violence. And so I think you are absolutely seeing at least the first half of that, where you are seeing cultural and religious dominance, native British, well, even English, native English, and predominantly Christian society not only adopt atheism, but now actually being replaced by Islamic cultural dominance in many of these large cities. That, that's the front half of her argument. Whether they follow through and become violent, I think they probably will. But they're kind of in a no-win situation here because there's no voting. Maybe there is some voting their way out of it, and that's if that country respects the will of the people. But at a certain point, through demographic replacement and then demographic decline, you're losing voters. You're eventually not going to have any kind of legitimate political power, except the one that you have to take by force. So I don't see any way out of this for them. Get replaced in another generation. When what is it? Some of these, the birth rate or something like that it's like 8 for some of the Islamic populations, and then it's like 1.5 or below 2 for the native British. Demographically, you will be erased. And that's old news. Everyone knows that. But my point is, your question is this headed towards violence? That's the only way out at this point, I think.
Well, it's the years and years and years of bad practices, bad habits. I don't want to say habits, but bad policies is now coming. It's catching up. It's coming to a head.
Yeah, you can. Well, what was it? Ayn Rand said you can ignore reality, but you can't ignore the consequences of reality. Well, the real bad thing is all these European countries are talking about going to war with Russia, and it's not going to be Ahmed and Mohammed enlisting in the British Army to go fight Ivan. It's going to be Peter and John who are going to be drafted to go fight Ivan. And it's like, what do you expect is going to happen to the native population of Europe when you kill off all the men in this next world war? It cannot happen. Hopefully they can replace their governments before that happens.
I mean, the way things are going right now, if they could do it tomorrow, it sounds like they would, to escalate the war with Russia.
Oh, that timeline keeps getting shorter and shorter. Last year, you had the Estonians, I think, came out and said something. Estonian intelligence said, oh, in 6 to 10 years, Russia's going to be able to reconstitute their military and invade the Baltics. And then it was in like 5 to 8 years, and now all of a sudden the latest thing I'm seeing is like it's going to be 4 to 5 years before Russia reconstitutes its military. And then most recently, just a couple of months ago, you had this. It was at least anonymous officials, these German and Polish intelligence officials, that said, yeah, Russia's looking at another special military operation in the Suwalki Gap between Lithuania and Poland. And that's going to be the next thing they're going to test to see if NATO is serious about invoking Article 5 against Russia. And if not, NATO breaks apart. And then if they do, you're going to force Europe into a war that they're not ready to fight. I'm just telling you that's what they said. I'm not saying that's reality, although it is plausible. So at any rate, potentially, by the end of this decade, we may see that come to a head.
We're even seeing in Japan right now, right? I mean, the declining birth rate, and what are they doing? They're shipping off a bunch of Indians to Japan.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah. And there were protests, anti-immigration protests, which is, just from my perspective, I think it's great. I think the anti-immigration backlash is fantastic. It's got to happen.
Mike, did we solve anything today? Did we fix the world's problems in our hour discussion?
No, but we got one step closer. So we've, everyone knows what the problems are. So the next step is you got to identify some solution. All conflict well, just say all forms of low intensity conflict before they go kinetic, before they turn into armed conflicts, they're political, social, and economic conflicts. The way to win political, social, and economic conflicts is by building political, social, and economic power. Those before a conflict becomes a national conflict, it is a local conflict. So what this says to me is that you've got to be organizing your red county or and in some cases counter organizing your red county against the people who are trying to organize against you to build that political, social, and economic power at the local level, because that's your fight. I can't control what happens in DC. I can't control what happens in my state capital. I can definitely control what happens in my neighborhood to realistic extents. I have much more influence or power within what happens in my county, within the confines of my county boundaries. That's where everyone's fight is. That's where the fight is. So you got to be organizing people. And maybe it's for electoral politics. Maybe it's for electing a good mayor or a good sheriff, or electing your guy to the county commission. That's what we're going to be doing in next year's elections, getting our guy on the county board of commissioners. And as getting that's our beachhead. We want to take over this county politically. And we want to make sure that we do not become the next Travis County, because that's what these left-wing movements are trying, or this left-wing community organizing group is doing in my county right now. They're trying to do that. And Travis County is where Austin is, just a mess. So the solution is you got to organize, or in some cases you got to counter-organize people, and you got to build political power. And winning elections is not winning. I'll just say this, I know. Winning elections is not winning. Imposing your will, inducing the submission of others is winning. And so there's this really bad tendency for us on the right to say, oh, Trump got elected, that's it, the war's over. No, you got to go the next step, and you have to exercise power to further your interests. And it's no longer, for a long time that was a bad thing. It can't be a bad thing anymore. You got to go the next step. So at any rate, that's my best advice. We haven't solved the problem, but we have at least outlined what everyone needs to be doing at the local level to win the conflict. And maybe it's a political conflict, maybe it's a social conflict, maybe it's responding to a tornado or a hurricane, maybe it's responding to man-made horrors beyond comprehension in the next few years. Whatever it is, you can't flex muscle you don't have. You can't use people that aren't organized. And so that's where the fight is for all of us right now. You got to be organizing your communities.
So many people, say that, no solutions, there's no solutions, no solutions. Mike just sat here, for over an hour, and we talked about solutions that people can do as individuals. So I don't want to get any more emails from people that I'm a black pillar and I don't provide any solutions. My guests don't provide solutions.
The only way out is through.
People, Mike, they literally, you're so doomer, you don't provide any solutions. I'm like, no, I'm just telling you what you don't want to hear. This fight is not over. It's never going to be over. It's the way life is.
Sure. Yeah, everyone has an enduring fight at the local level. So I agree with you. It's easy to black pill, but once you get your boots on the ground at the local level and you actually start, I've got a local group here. There's 6 of us. That's it. There's 6 of us. But it starts with us 6. And there's a larger political group they're not very active. But the next thing for us is to get them active, going into the 2026 election cycle, getting our people elected, and then actually ramming through some change, playing some defense, making sure that these leftists can't come in and take power and organize our communities against us. But the rest of it's going on the offensive, which is doing everything we can to not just win elections, but to run them out of the county. I want this place hard as a rock. I do not want them to. It's cultural encroachment is what it is. It's big city culture encroaching into our rural county. We can't allow that to happen. So at any rate, thanks for having me.
Where can people find you?
I'm most active on X. I'm also on Instagram and other places. Gray Zone Intel at Gray Zone Intel. That's gray with an A. And my website is forwardobserver.com.
Mike, as always, I always enjoy our conversations and look forward to continuing to follow your work and more conversations ahead. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, absolutely. I enjoyed it. Yeah, thanks for having me on again, Michael.
Mic drop.